Good evening. My name is Julie Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of PACTV. We're the designated government access provider for the town of Plymouth. Our charge is to provide coverage, live or recorded, of board or committee meetings, town meetings, special events, press conferences, informational sessions like this one, etc. Our mission is to inform and educate the residents of Plymouth. We are funded not by the taxpayers or the town per se, but rather by the ever-dwindling cable television subscribers of Verizon and Comcast within the boundaries of Plymouth. I have personally had the good fortune of working for PACTV for the past 10 years, and I am not a resident of Plymouth. As of last November, there were almost 50,000 registered voters in the town of Plymouth, and typically only 12 to 16% show up to vote in the local town elections. For the democratic process, this is a sad trend that we are seeing in all the towns we serve that include Pembroke, Kingston, and Duxbury. Plymouth is no different. This May 20th, aside from candidates running for positions on boards and committees, the voters will be asked to decide a question. Shall the town vote to approve the proposed new charter? Yes or no? The outcome of that vote will significantly change the governance of the town. In order to fully understand the impact of the new charter, voters need to hear from the people who crafted it and those who serve in positions that will be affected by it. In the end, it is our hope to spark the interest and engagement for the voters and from the voters. PACTV invited 12 people to serve on this forum. I will introduce them shortly in alphabetical order. They will then have an opportunity to speak for 1 to 2 minutes, and guaranteed they'll all take 2, on why they do or do not support this newly written charter. I have asked them for their opening statement to confine their comments to how the changes would affect their particular position on a board or committee or a town management staff, one of the departments that they work for. Since the Charter Commission as a whole spent many months on crafting the final version, I felt it only fair that 3 members of that committee would be panelists. For the boards and committee representation, I asked the chair of each committee to select a representative. And here are your panelists in alphabetical order. Bill Abbott, who's the chair of the Charter Commission. Lynn Barrett, who's the finance director and is joining us remotely tonight. Thank you, Lynn. Steve Bulletin, Vice Chair of Planning Board. Derek Brindisi, Town Manager. Kevin Canty, Chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee. Lee Hartman, Director of Planning and Development. Harry Helm, Select Board Member. Joseph Hutchinson, Committee of Precinct Chairs. Bill Cohan, Clerk of the Charter Commission. Kelly McElreath, Town Clerk. Lawrence Pizer, Vice Chair of the Charter Commission, and Steve Trifletti, Town Moderator. We will begin our timed statements with a 2-minute maximum. The clock is up there. You can all see it. And I'm going to cut you off right about 2 minutes, so I hope you've timed it well. Bill Abbott, you have 2 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you. Since I'm the leadoff batter here and the chair of the Charter Commission, I want to tell you what we've been doing for the last 2 years. This is the new charter. This is the red line charter. It's full of red lines. You can see the changes, many changes. This is a charter of change. One thing that is clear immediately is that it's not change for change's sake, but change for 2 reasons: to fix what was working, not working in our current form of charter, and to make the checks and balances of our charter ever more effective between the legislative branch, town meeting, and the executive branch, the select board. The current charter is basically the charter which was adopted back in 1999. I was the chair of that commission some 20 years ago. And the mission back then was clear. There was a growing discontent about the way town meeting operated, obviously poor preparation, little accountability, generally a shabby process. Plymouth was in serious danger of losing its town meeting. We, nevertheless, prepared a charter. We were not lured into the strongman type of mayor form of government, the authoritarian type of government. We prepared a charter that tried to enhance town meeting, the pure democratic form of government, And we made many changes in our town meeting that actually made our town meeting the gold standard in the state, with town meeting precinct caucuses, preparation in advance of town meeting, time limits on submission of warrant articles, and the charter passed with 62% of the vote in 1999, and that's the last time a charter is successfully passed. And here we are 20 years later, and again, there's a clamoring for change. Many people wanted change, and a charter commission was elected in 2021, and we've now produced a charter with what we think makes our current form of charter more effective.
Okay, thank you. That's your 2 minutes. And next up, we have Lynn Barrett, who's our finance director. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. So what I did was review the charter as it affects the finance department primarily. The finance department supports every process of our government. Most importantly, the legislative process, with supporting town meeting, providing support to our advisory and finance committee, and support to, the moderator and those kinds of things. So I looked at this proposed charter and sort of looked at all the different areas that have been added as proposals to see how those would affect primarily the finance department, but also sort of in general for all different departments. There are several areas in the charter, approximately 15 or so, where we see that there is a cost component, either through support personnel for new committees or costs associated with implementing specific proposals in the charter. And so we equate those to about 8.5 full-time equivalents to be added, and approximately $1.4 million in costs at current levels. Some of those costs would be a one-time cost sort of to initiate, but a majority of those costs would be annual costs that we would really incur every year. So those are just really the opening comments that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Next up, we have Steve Bulletin, Vice Chair of the Planning Board. Steve, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you. Because of the potential impact on long-term planning in Plymouth, I reviewed this proposed charter line by line. Because the issue is not what the people who are in town government now might do, but rather those in the future that we don't know. Now, I don't have time to go through every provision, which I'm sure is a relief to many people, but everything that I say is backed by a provision in the charter. So if asked, I can give that to you, and I encourage you to ask. I appreciate the Commission's efforts to include provisions regarding our master plan in the new charter, but the proposed changes to the town government will make it much more difficult to actually execute that master plan. That's because the proposed charter potentially creates a government that is less informed, less transparent, less representative, and less efficient. Less informed because it limits the flow of information, particularly allowing town meeting to control what is presented and what is considered. Less transparent because greater responsibility and authority are given to town meeting and the COPC, neither of which are subject to the open meeting laws. Less representative because more people who make decisions will not be elected town-wide on town-wide issues. And less efficient because it places so many new requirements on many of our boards and committees and our departments that there'll be much greater expense and limited time to actually govern. I know this wasn't the intention of the Charter Commission when they created this charter, but it is what the language allows. We need to make it easier to do long-term planning here in Plymouth, and this charter will actually make it more difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Derek Brindisi, the Plymouth Town Manager. Derek, you have 2 minutes.
Great, thank you, and good evening to everybody and my colleagues on the panel. So I wanted to just focus my discussion on Chapter 9 of the transition provisions. There's an expectation, I think, for many in the community that haven't followed the Charter Commission, that, once approved, that this will be operationalized in short order. There are a number of committees, as you can read throughout the charter: an appointments committee, an oversight committee, a communications committee, a facilities management committee, a district implementation committee, and others that are being asked to be appointed to help with the transition and start to put many of these measures in place. What's not noted amongst throughout the charter is that there are many. The charter is written in such a broad way in many of the different sections. The only way that we can really operationalize, I think, as envisioned by the Charter Commission, is we have to go ahead and create bylaws. So just a quick example, there's a third town meeting that's being recommended for the month of January. It does not outline when in the month of January, when the warrants will open, when the warrant is to be closed, when COPC and the Board of Selectmen are supposed to take their vote to whether or not to have that town meeting. So in order for us to truly operationalize this, I'm thinking minimum it's going to take us 12 months to pour through the charter and develop those bylaws, which ultimately will have to go to town meeting for final ratification and approval. So I just wanted to be clear to the voters that it's going to take us at least 12, possibly up to 18 months for us to truly meet the expectations of this charter. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Kevin Canty, the Chair of Advisory and Finance. Kevin, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Julie. I am Kevin Canty, Chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee. The proposed charter contains many significant detrimental changes, several of which would have serious negative impacts on the work of the Advisory and Finance Committee. What follows are some of the most egregious. The proposed charter would change the Advisory and Finance Committee to just the Finance Committee and empower the COPC to review articles that the COPC views as non-financial in nature. There is no guideline as to how this determination about what is financial in nature and what is not would be made. Undoubtedly, some articles will be reviewed by both the COPC and Finance Committee, possibly resulting in disparate recommendations. The proposed charter would permit town meeting members to serve on the Finance Committee. Currently, FinCom members attend caucuses to explain the majority opinion of the FinCom on each article, not their individual opinion. I fear the proposed charter would create a class of super town meeting members who would try and tell the rest of their precinct how to vote, rather than provide the impartial advice town meeting members are free to accept or reject under the current charter. The proposed charter also creates a third town meeting in January, which would require the Finance Committee to review articles over the holiday season. This will lead to dramatic and consistent turnover of the Finance Committee, degrading the quality of our work over time. 3 town meetings would also leave Plymouth in essentially perpetual town meeting mode, leaving little time for department and division heads to actually run the town, causing things to fall through the cracks and cost taxpayers more money than they would have otherwise. The proposed charter would create a system where it takes more time, more effort, and more money to get less done. Plymouth needs a government that can take care of the current and future needs of its residents. This charter is the exact opposite of what Plymouth needs. For those reasons, among others, this charter includes significant negative changes to the Finance Committee and the operation of Plymouth's town government as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Lee Hartman, Director of Planning and Development. Lee, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. So again, to build off of the comments that Mr. Canty just made, the 3-cycle town meeting really would put quite a bit of pressure, especially on the planning department. I see that as we would go through town meetings, it would be a constant cycle of preparing for town meetings, having the town meeting, and attending the many meetings required to get to town meeting, and then the follow-up involved in it. The charter creates a new committee, the Master Plan Task Force, which isn't a bad thing, but it does create a new standing committee. And also this charter has very lengthy list of master plan compliance requirements that must be done through the Department of Planning and Development. We're already understaffed for our abilities to do what we're doing now. To have that additional requirement will require 1 or 2 additional staff members in my department. Another thing the charter calls for is an update of the master plan every 10 years, which again is a very good thing, but be aware that we're estimating that cost is somewhere in the $400,000 to $500,000 range each update. And then I just want to point out that the master plan, and there's been a lot of discussion about it, it's not a checklist where you have, yes, no, it complies, it doesn't comply. And I can talk about that a little bit more, but again, compliance and alignment with the master plan won't be cut and dry. It's something that will be a little more nebulous than that. And then finally, the master plan language that's in here, and I can go into more detail if someone has questions, but the language is vague and confusing. An interpretation of this section of the bylaw is going to be very difficult, a bylaw of the charter is going to be very difficult to do once you get into it. And again, I can talk some details if anybody has a question on that, but again, that language will pose a challenge for us to interpret. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Harry Helm, Select Board Member. Harry, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. By the final statement that accompanies the charter booklet, the Commission's intention, among other things, is to create more efficiency and increase democracy. Additionally, in the proposed charter itself, town meeting and the COPC are declared for the first time as co-equal branches of our co-equal branch of our government. That's 3 items. I think everyone will agree that these are highly laudable goals, but let's take a look at each of those 3. More democracy. The COPC is being given actual powers for the first time, yet the COPC is not directly elected by the voters. The Select Board is elected directly by the voters. COPC members are elected to town meeting, but they are appointed to the COPC by their individual precinct caucuses, not the residents. This is a step back from our current representative democracy. More efficiency. This charter will require the hiring of several new employees to manage the new reporting, committees, and structures it creates. This document promotes greater bureaucracy rather than greater efficiency. Co-equality of the legislative and executive branches. This document actually shifts the balance of power highly to town meeting and COPC. Just a few examples, and these are only a few because I only have 2 minutes. The Select Board is particularly prevented from interfering with day-to-day administration or giving orders to anyone reporting to the town manager, but town meeting COPC is not. The legislative branch may, in fact, now give direction to the town manager. The FinCom will no longer be an independent advisory body. It will be a wholly owned subsidiary of the COPC. The COPC selects 10 of the 15. Town moderator, no longer elected by residents, selects 5 of the 15. The co-equal executive branch of the Select Board
Okay,
has
Harry,
no say.
that's 2 minutes. Thank you. Next up, we have Joseph Hutchinson, Committee of Precinct Chairs. Joseph, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Julie.
Can you get closer to your microphone?
Yep.
Thank you.
Charters distribute power. Charters define who's in charge, the structure and process of boards, committees, and departments, and likewise, they provide for oversight and accountability. But powers come with responsibilities, and this proposed charter expands the responsibilities of the COPC. We're now charged to analyze and vet non-financial warrant articles, appoint 10 finance committee members, appoint precinct advisory committee members, appoint voters as members of a district member implementation committee, appoint 3 COPC members to the legislative oversight committee, participate in the appointment of a charter review committee. We are asked to we're told to convene quarterly meetings with the select board, a possible 3rd town meeting, and a moderator election forum. Likewise, we have to provide quarterly reports to town meetings and other committees. And the impact of all this is in terms of answering the question, do we have the capacity to get this work done? And by capacity, I am referring to the scope of work, the time to do that work, the skills and talents required to do that work, and the funding to acquire the capacity. In terms of the scope of work, just consider the volunteer pool to do all that work that I just talked about. 18 members have to do that work. And the time required is going to expand the meeting frequency across the board. you can think of committee meetings that would have to, committees that would have to be, subcommittees that would have to be created to address each of those issues. And again, I'd remind you of the size of the volunteer pool. Skills and talent require.
Okay, time's up. Thank you.
Yep.
Next up is Bill Cohen, who is the clerk of the Charter Commission. Bill?
Thank you. I was elected to serve on the Charter Commission for the last 2 years. I'm a lifelong resident of Plymouth, and I've had the opportunity to serve as a town meeting member and on various committees and boards for the last 24 years. Most recently, I had the opportunity to serve with Bill Abbott, Larry Pizer, David Malaguti, Betsy Hall, Frank Mann, Wrestling Brewster, Scott Vecchi, and David Peck on the Charter Commission. We did not always see eye to eye, but I did observe from my fellow commissioners that they were committed to improving our current form of government. I'm committed to this process. I believe in public service. I believe in the government by the people and for the people. For this to be true, we should be open to change, and we should be improving, but never undermining or minimizing the people's involvement in their government. Town meeting is a highly representative form of government, but from time to time, it should evolve as demands are put upon it. We often speak to the need for more responsive, transparent, and accountable government. We need to put these words into action and results. I would ask my fellow residents to give this proposed charter a careful consideration. The charter will give the people a legislative oversight to ensure that town meeting actions are carried out efficiently. The town charter will give the people a legislative body which greatly understands the financial process and demands on the town by allowing town meetings to participate in building a budget that they ultimately are responsible for. This charter will give the people a more inclusive committee appointment process with greater community transparency. This charter will give the people greater representation on their select board with reasonable board members to address growing neighborhood issues and improve voter turnout across the town. This charter will improve checks and balances. These are not just words. These are actions that build reality. It gives the people, the elected and appointed officials of this town, a new government that can meet the challenges of the 21st century.
Thank you. Next up is Kelly McElreath. You have 2 minutes, town clerk.
Good evening, everyone. As Julia just said, I am the town clerk. Recently on board for the last 7 months, so I had the opportunity to review the proposed charter, and I'm just going to outline some of the additional responsibilities that will now be in the town clerk's office. As the town clerk, I'll be the ex officio of the Precinct Advisory Committee, where every 10 years when the federal census is conducted, we would be looking at populations, trends, and precinct lines to ensure that they are fair across the community. I will also be the custodian of the recordings of the representative town meetings with timestamps. So if somebody wanted to see how a particular article was being discussed at town meeting, they would have that ability. With an additional town meeting that previous speakers have spoken to, I will need to prepare, attend, compose detailed minutes, and submit required documentation such as to the Attorney General for bylaw changes. I will also be responsible for voting record of each representative town meeting member on the website. Every 3 years, when the town moderator is elected by the representative town meeting members, I will have to have a special election during the town meeting to ensure fairness that would require additional resources. I will also be a member of the Legislature Oversight Committee to help track the warrant articles. There's a chapter in there that I'm the receiver of all allegations of non-compliant with the charter by any individuals or governmental body and the responsibility to ensure follow-up of all the parties involved. And lastly, I will also be a member of the District Implementation Committee. With all these additional responsibilities, I would think that we would need additional staff in the town clerk's office in order to handle all of this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Next up is Lawrence Pizer. Lawrence is the vice chair of the Charter Commission. You have 2 minutes.
Town meeting dates back to 1637, or, according to some interpretations, 1620. It has served the town well for many centuries. However, that in and of itself is not enough of a reason to keep it in the 21st century. Why we should keep it is that our representative town meeting is the best method of bringing the will of the citizens of Plymouth to settle the political issues of the town. We on the Charter Commission heard the argument that there are more efficient forms of government, and we agree, but none of them protect our democratic institutions like town meeting. We studied at length forms of municipal government, and on the commission, there were no votes for mayor. We sought to empower town meeting and the town meeting members to function at their highest capacity. Just as Plymouth founded the office of Select Board member in the 17th century, Plymouth created the Committee of Precinct Chairs for the 21st century. This charter provides far more definition for the role of that committee. We work to clarify the distinction between the executive and legislative roles throughout town government. The Select Board and the Planning Board are and must act as the major planning agencies for Plymouth. Plymouth will remain successful because this charter maximizes participation of both voters and advisory committees.
Thank you very much. And last up is Steve Trifletti, Town Moderator. Steve, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Chapter 2, Section 8, subsection 1 references the election of the moderator. And at the outset, the chair of the Charter Review Commission said their goal was to deal with things that weren't working. Also talked about town meeting be the purest democratic form of government. Our clerk of the Charter Commission talked about government by the people, for the people. Now, the changes proposed in this section would delete the regular town elections for electing the moderator, but instead would have town meeting members. And effectively, that means under the current town meeting, 82 town meeting members, not the voters of the town, could elect the moderator. And so in thinking about the initial presentation about something not working, we could wonder, why is this a good idea? Although noting that a majority of the Charter Review Commission are town meeting members, it's not surprising that they might come to this conclusion. But I would suggest to you that it might be a little elitist to have only up to 82 town meeting members as opposed to the electorate in the town of Plymouth. The Finance Committee, we've already heard from the chair regarding the concerns about creating super legislators, which would be line 564, because it allows for town meeting members to also serve. And yet we heard earlier in the presentation from the Commission that they're looking for checks and balances. And I would ask, what are the checks and balances when you have the people making the appointments being capable of appointing themselves? In fact, I would observe that the entire Finance Committee could be appointed by all members of the COPC, since that's a possibility. It's not ruled out in the current charter. Finally, Chapter 2, Section 2, subsection 1, regarding the size of town meeting. When I have spoken to this commission and others, I've encouraged them to consider reducing the numbers because people are concerned about the time they have to speak. They don't have committee assignments throughout the year.
Thank you.
That's their opportunity.
Time's
Thank
up.
you.
Thank you all. As you will witness tonight and over the next couple of months, there are staunch proponents and opponents to this proposed charter. It is up to you, the voters, to decide, educate yourselves, and make your own mind up as to whether you want to vote yes or no to adopt this final version. Over the past couple of weeks, PACTV has reached out to the public to let them know that we would be having this forum and asking them for questions that they might have about the final version, which has been available on the town's website for quite a few weeks. One factor which I think we all need to please keep in mind is that a relatively small percentage of registered voters truly understand the way this town is governed. We might understand all the words that are saying tonight, but there's an awful lot of people who don't. Charters, bylaws, policies and procedures, more than 40 boards and committees, positions that are elected versus appointed, and why. The list goes on of things that people probably don't fully understand. So please consider who your audience is here tonight and make your points or counterpoints in language that can be easily understood by the voters who do not live in the government world the way that we all seem to do. Agreed? Okay, great. We combined the questions that we got by subject matter, and I will ask one of the panelists to answer the question and then ask for a rebuttal from an opposing view. There will be a strict 3-minute time response on these. So we got a ton of questions, and they were, I literally had to just kind of, okay, what was the subject? Because some of them were 2 paragraphs long, some of them were 1 sentence. But the majority of the questions we got are here, and they're in 7 different questions. So question 1, was the original charge of the commission to evaluate and present the various potential forms of government? Based on the outcome, weren't the citizens deprived of their opportunity to learn about other options? Now, Bill, you talked about this in your opening statement, about how you did look at different forms of government. So do you, or do you want one of your other?
Well, could you just repeat it? Because
Sure.
the distance is making it hard for me to hear everything you're saying.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. Was the original charge of the commission to evaluate and present the various potential forms of government? And based on the outcome, weren't the citizens deprived of the opportunity to learn about other options? Now, before you answer, do you want to answer that, or do you want to give one of your other 2 Charter Commission members the 3 minutes to answer?
Is the question, what exercise did the commission go through to examine other forms of government?
Well, it's basically saying, why weren't the voters given a choice on?
Oh, okay, yep, I mean, I can certainly answer that.
Okay. You have 3 minutes. Mark, go ahead and start the clock.
Right, the commission was elected in May. May of 2021. I would say for 4 months, all we did was listen to anybody and everybody that would come in and talk about their particular desires for a form of government. We had total open mind at this point. No commissioner had expressed a desire to go one way or the other, whether it was towards an authoritarian, strongman mayor form. In fact, nobody on the commission supported a mayor form of government. I can say that but there were folks that wanted to look at the town council form, the others, town meeting. We went and studied 30. We actually had an assignment to study 30 to 40 charters. I think it was like 36. We reported on the charters of towns like Plymouth. And this took about 5 months before we even began to think about which way we're going to go. We went all through the fall of 2021, did the same thing. We asked actually every member that I see up here on the panel was invited to come and speak to us and give us your ideas on town government. A few of you did, some of you did. 1 or 2 of you did not show up. But we were trying to get ideas, and we were gathering it, and we didn't take a position until early in the next year. I think it was January or February when we finally took a vote that we needed to put a center to the form of government, and that's when we selected town meeting. The commissioners that were elected, I would say 6 of us certainly were saw the advantages of town meeting. There were some on the Charter Commission that did not. At the same time, the town was promoting its own little ballot question, which in May came out in favor of town meeting. But our decision was made in the early part of 2022.
Okay, thank you. Would someone like to refute that? Okay, so Kevin Canty is going to do the point-counterpoint on that. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Julie. So I have heard that refrain that the Charter Commission came in with an open mind repeatedly. I have in my hand a mailing that was sent to every registered voter prior to the election of the Charter Commission, which reads, on Saturday, May 15th, you'll have the opportunity to vote for 9 members of the Charter Commission. The candidates listed below understand that we need to improve our current form of government by modernizing it for the 21st century, by preserving its highly representative features that allow residents to fully participate in the political process and protect the financial future of the town. The candidates listed are Bill Abbott, Betsy Hall, Bill Cohane, David Malaguti, Francis Mand, and Larry Pizer, among others that were not elected. Please consider each of these candidates and vote for 9 of them on Saturday, May 15th. They said in this article and in other materials that were disseminated to the town of Plymouth that if they were elected, that town meeting would be preserved for the future of Plymouth. They did not come into this process with an open mind. 6 of the 9 members came in with the idea that they were going to keep town meeting no matter what happened throughout the process. And that's exactly what happened. They had a majority from the outset that had the idea that town meeting in some form or another was going to be kept around. The problem is that the proposals of this charter commission take town meeting from something that, which is what we have right now, what we will still have if this charter does not pass. They take something that can work despite its problems and change it into something that cannot work because of how many problems that it's going to have. It creates a complicated, excessively bureaucratic, non-transparent form of government that will not be able to get out of its own way. The town of Plymouth will be in perpetual town meeting mode, unable to keep up with the needs of day-to-day operations of this town. We are already in a position where this past year, there was a significant discussion about whether the town, for financial reasons, needed to lay off several members of the school department, teachers, and administrators in order to make ends meet. This charter would mandate the hiring of several personnel just to support mandates that the town would have no decision as to whether to employ or not. What do you think will happen to our schools and to our town's vital services if these proposals pass? This charter would change Plymouth in ways that the residents would not be served. The only people that would be served are special interests that want to keep town meeting in this town perpetually, no matter what, despite all signs that Plymouth has outgrown some of the cumbersome aspects of this. But at least what we have can meet the needs of this town better than what is proposed in this charter.
Thank you. We'll be able to revisit this towards the end, and I'm sure there'll be other questions on the same vein. There's question 2, which a lot of people asked in different ways, was how does this new charter increase efficiency and lower costs for the town and its taxpayers? Who would like to take on that one? Anybody in the Charter Commission want to answer that one? Lawrence?
I guess the answer is no. It is not designed to create greater efficiency and specifically to lower costs. What it's designed to do is to make the government of the town of Plymouth, with its $300 million or so annual budget, work to create an opportunity for the people of Plymouth to translate what they want into what the town does. It's not free, and no one says it's free. We just want to make the town work better. No question, there are costs involved.
Okay. Counterpoint to that? Anyone? Harry?
Well, I think the answer to that question is no. It is not more efficient, and it is not cost-effective. I looked at it myself. I didn't include, what perhaps Lynn Barrett, who told you a price, but this alone will cause the need for at least 5 new town employees to handle the various aspects of this charter, whether it's the reporting, whether it's the background, the committees, the additional duties, responsibilities that are being placed on the town manager. It will cost more money. Okay, will it be more efficient? No, it won't. And I find it very interesting that the representative from the Charter Commission basically agrees. It will not be more cost-effective. It will not be more efficient. And the excuse being, well, the residents of Plymouth will get more out of it. I think that when the residents of Plymouth actually look through the changes that they're making, they're going to find that they don't actually get more out of this. They just get more bureaucracy. And that's just the bottom line with what is going on inside of this document.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
I agree with what folks have said here, but democracy is one form of government and autocracy is another. I believe profoundly in democracy and want it established here in Plymouth and maintained here in Plymouth. And democracy is messy. Whatever form you try to create with it, it's going to be messy. Efficient? No. Democracies anywhere are as messy as well, they're messy. I think that this form can persist with us, and as Mr. Candy points out, it can be made to work. And that's what I would hope that we do with this proposal, that we make it a learning experience, and that we, if it doesn't pass, we can have a charter committee to actually pursue some of the goals that this proposal puts out there. And I just, I don't want, what's on my mind is this notion of efficiency. That wasn't the goal when they started. And, their goal was to balance between the legislature and the executive. And, in doing that, they probably could have taken a couple of different paths. But I'd love to see us continue to pursue those goals.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, Harry, 1 minute?
I won't need a minute.
Okay.
Joe, I totally respect what you're saying, but let's point out, in the letter crafted by the Charter Commission, it says their intention was to make our government more efficient. And we have a member of the Charter Commission saying it is not more efficient. Okay, that's so. And I would like to also point out, we're voting on this. We're not voting on whether or not we will eject town meeting, okay, and go to another form of government. We're voting on this charter. And to even entertain the idea that you should vote for it and it will make it better somehow, I think is a very big mistake.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to the next question. Question 3. What is the process for vetting candidates for all these boards and committees positions, especially town meeting members? Are they qualified, and can they commit the time needed to perform all these functions? Who would like to take that? Go ahead, Bill.
So it is in the efficiency of, in the improvement of this form of government is going to be seeking town meeting members to be more engaged in the process and more informed. When you look at our current Finance Committee, it's appointed by the moderator with the assistance of the two appointees to look at resumes. These people come on to the Finance Committee, they look at the proposals to town meeting, they form their opinions, those opinions take place during these meetings, they take the form of supporting documents, they go to town meeting. Town meeting has this material to rely on. What we're suggesting in the new charter is to get the town meeting member more involved in that process, understanding the budgetary process. As the town builds the budget, they're present. They're gaining this information firsthand. They're discussing it, they're making recommendations, and they're eventually voting on the budget in a much more informed way. When you have a legislative body voting on a $260 million budget, they should be knowledgeable about what they're voting on. And this charter provides that cross-pollination, where town meetings members are going to be more educated in terms of when they go to vote on that budget. So I see that as an example of how we can improve the town meeting member when it comes to their greatest responsibility, and that's approving a budget once a year.
Okay, point, counterpoint, I'll have Steve.
The way this charter, this document, this proposed charter, addresses town meeting actually makes town meeting less informed. We currently have an independent advisory and finance committee. Independent in that they are not beholden to either the select board or to town meeting. They're appointed by the town moderator, who is elected by everyone in town. If people have difficulty with who's on the finance committee, they have a remedy: vote out the town moderator. This charter does not give any remedy to the citizens at large. Instead, what it does is it makes town meeting solely in control of the information it receives. The COPC and the town moderator will appoint the finance committee, and both of those are appointed by town meeting. Town meeting will hear town meeting's voices. That's it. The checks and balances are gone. So they are less informed. They're also less qualified, not because of the individuals who are running for town meeting, but the individuals who aren't. 20% of our town meeting representatives were not candidates for town meeting. They were write-ins. Not to mention the 3 or 4 who were actually appointed because those caucuses couldn't even find somebody to write in. So we are actually losing our representation. We are not gaining the most qualified people. When this issue was raised, and Mr. Trifoletti did raise the issue that we should consider lowering the number of town meeting members. The second time that came up for a vote, one of the Charter Commission members stated, "I know of a number of people who won't run for town meeting if they actually have to go up against a candidate." That's not an argument for keeping the number of people. That's an argument for reducing it. This is a very, very complicated form of government. There's no question. And Plymouth is an incredibly complicated town. We need the best and brightest, the most dedicated and diligent in all levels of our government, town meeting in particular. They are the final arbiter. But if they're not getting the information, and they're not fully informed, and they're not fully engaged, we are not going to get the best representation.
Thank you. Steve Trifoletti, Town Moderator, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, Steve certainly covered some of my concerns, but certainly I think we need to look at the reality of what we have had. And the question was vetting town meeting members. So again, it's difficult to vet if you don't have enough people running for the positions, if you have vacant slots, or if you have no opposition. How are these candidates really being vetted? And I don't see that this charter helps that. In fact, I think it makes it more of a challenge because, again, we're not reducing the number of town meeting members. We're increasing the number of town meeting members because Plymouth is a growth community. We just added 3 precincts. We just added 27 new members. One of the ways in which you could vet a town meeting member is by listening to them speak at town meeting, act at town meeting. But as you increase the numbers, your opportunity to hear your town meeting members speak is going to be reduced by the sheer number of town meeting members. The moderator cannot call on people as often if there are more members and more people looking to speak. And finally, the experience we've had in this town with the FinCom is because of the workload, we find that sometimes people resign after serving a few terms because the workload is difficult. Now we are creating a situation where we're increasing the number of responsibilities of town meeting members such that, as town meeting member Joe Hutchison from the COPC mentioned, do they have the capacity to be doing that? So in terms of the question about vetting, I don't see that this charter improves the vetting of town meeting members.
Okay, thank you. I know, just one moment, I just wanted to make a commentary here. I know that, first of all, anyone who volunteers to be on a board or committee should be absolutely applauded. It's thankless, it's hard work, and I think we owe everyone a debt of thanks that actually does this. Anybody who puts their name in and says, yeah, I'll serve. I've heard a lot about how complicated this town is, and clearly it is. My question was, and this wasn't quite finished to be answered, is not only are there's a lot of town meeting members, but there's going to be some new committees created by this charter. Do we have a pool of interested enough people to be involved in this. And I'm not saying I'm against it or for it, I'm just wondering. Bill, I'll let you go ahead and take this one first.
The question of the size of town meeting has come up over the last probably 10 years. And those of you with some memory, this was a feature of a change in the charter that was proposed a few years, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And we looked at all the other town meetings in terms of their size, and Plymouth had actually one of the very smallest town meetings in the Commonwealth. As I remember, we did a bar chart of all the town meetings. Many of them, whether it was Arlington, Brookline, Natick, then Framingham, although they lost their town meeting, were all much larger than Plymouth. Plymouth had a town meeting in the between 100 and 130 or whatever, and it was really, there was only, I think, one town meeting that was smaller, it was Saugus. You don't have to have a small town meeting. I mean, you know, you can have a town meeting of 300 or 250 or whatever. In Brookline, I think, is, you know, it's well over 200. So the size is really kind of, it really always interests me when they start attacking the size of town meeting. I mean, town meeting is what it's all about. You know, democracy is not a spectator sport. People do participate. This is what Plymouth has that makes Plymouth absolutely unique. There are volunteers, those that want to participate. I don't understand Steve's criticisms of our town meeting. I just don't. I was trying to follow his argument to make it, I guess, smaller or get rid of it altogether and have no citizen representatives, just have a mayor and his staff. You know, over the years, I've watched the finances of these towns that went for mayor and what happened to their tax rate and to the expenses. And they're in worse shape than Plymouth. Whether it's Weymouth, look what's happened in Framingham. These, you know, Plymouth is doing very well financially. You know, it was interesting. It would have been good if we'd heard from some of the town's representatives when the commission was meeting that it was going to cost X number of extra employees paid. That's the first I've heard of it is here tonight, that we're going to spend X dollars. Lynn was before us, I don't know how many times. She never mentioned this. So obviously, we're going to have to deal with that issue if you're going to bring it up for the very first time and see whether or not that's true.
Okay.
It never was expressed to us. Thank you.
The question was, thank you for that clarification, was about the number of people that we're going to need to serve on these committees. Mr. Canty, you have a minute, then Mr. Helm, 1 minute.
Thank you, Julie. So in my opinion, we do not. So presently, there are, depending on how you want to count it, there's about 300, 350 different positions in town, all of which are worn the hat by about 200 people wearing multiple hats, some with one, some with more than one, some with many. And we just saw, when re-precincting happened as a result of the 2020 census, many longtime town meeting members took that as an opportunity not to continue serving in a town meeting member capacity. And that's why, among other things, there were so many more new first-time town meeting members this year than there ever have been before, in addition to adding 27 different spots. But there's a tremendous amount of work. It's almost a full-time job keeping up with how many boards and committees there are in Plymouth and everything that they're doing. And people get burnt out over time, and younger generations are not filling the spots that are being vacated by the older generations, as I've seen it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Harry and then Bill.
I would just like to answer sort of the previous question and yours. This charter does allow for the creation of a new committee, which is called the Appointment Advisory Committee. Okay, by the charter, they are responsible, and this is all new, so it's in red for you viewing at home on page 42. The duties of the Appointment Advisory Committee shall include notice posting, active recruitment, and advertising of vacancies. Okay, so they're going to try to address this dearth of people volunteering for all of these. Okay, there are good things in this charter revision, but let's also remember that any committee or board created by the COPC or town meeting is exempt from having to pay any attention to this Appointments Advisory Committee. They also look at the candidates
Okay.
and make recommendations.
Time's up. Go ahead, Bill.
I want to touch on what the Select Board member, Harry Helm, indicated. Yes, one of the things that the Charter Commission includes is a appointment advisory committee. And this is to engage the community, educate them on how this government works and how they can play a role in it. One of the greatest problems we're having in this community is getting the word out how Plymouth functions and how you can play a role in it. And what I'm seeing is a resurgence of younger people involved in this process. I pay a lot of attention to town meeting. I have to go there this spring town meeting, I won't be there, but I have to go and present articles, and I've been doing it for 21 years. And what I'm seeing in that capacity is younger people getting involved in this process. And that is promising. And we thought it would also be helpful to complement that energy out there in the community by engaging them with more information of how people can participate on a local level with their government. This appointment committee is going to be actively noticing the community about opportunities and educating people how they can serve. So
Okay.
in one way, that
Thank you.
committee engages that problem.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go on to another question. Right now, we can come back to this afterwards, but I want to go on to another question. Why has the Committee of Precinct Chairs been given so much more power when they are elected from the field of town meeting members that are often write-ins or appointments and not a reflection necessarily of that particular precinct's voters' wishes? I think we might have already answered this in a way. Does anyone want to add anything to this? Or has this been asked and answered? The question was, why has the COPC, for you at home, COPC is Committee of Precinct Chairs, been given so much more power when they're elected from the field of town meeting members that are often write-ins or appointments and are not a reflection necessarily of the particular precinct voters' wishes?
I think it's important to note that more power hasn't been given to the committees of precinct chairs. No authority has been taken from another board and given to that precinct chairs. What we found in this form of government is that there are circumstances that are being overlooked. And we saw that the precinct committee of chairs was created, and we thought we would give them more responsibility to address things like legislative oversight and the quality of participants that we have on our FinCom. Where we didn't see that happening in our government, we thought that we would give that responsibility to the Committee of Precinct Chairs. I think there's a big misnomer that we're giving this power to the Committee of Precinct Chairs, where we're not. They're going to maintain the same level of power they had, but they will be taking on more responsibility where there was some oversight not happening.
Okay, counterpoint to that?
Well,
No, I'm sorry.
which one?
Can I, or who? I'll happily.
You can do a minute, then you can do a minute.
Excellent, thank you very
then
much.
Joe.
So, there's absolutely power being taken from others or created and given to the COPC. So first of all, currently, the COPC does not appoint anybody to the FinCom. Under this charter, they would appoint 10 of the 15 members of the FinCom. That's power being taken from the moderator and given to the COPC. Currently, the COPC is not charged with reviewing any articles for town meeting. FinCom does that, the Advisory and Finance Committee. Under this charter, the Advisory and Finance Committee is changed to the Finance Committee, and the COPC is mandated to tier articles that it views as non-financial in nature. Again, no guideline is provided to how that determination is going to be made. They would hear those articles and issue recommendations to town meeting. Lastly, since I only have about 15 seconds left, town meeting currently is called by the Select Board. Under this charter, the COPC has the ability to weigh in on whether to waive that January town meeting. That's a power being taken from the Select Board and given to the COPC. It's dishonest to say that we're not giving power to the COPC from other places.
Okay.
It's a matter,
Hold on one second. Go ahead, you can just.
I've been called
you
dishonest.
Respond, 20 seconds.
That's not entirely accurate, that the Finance Committee currently appointed by the moderator. One person is appointing 15 people to see a $260 million budget for 60,000 people. We thought it might be helpful to expand the process of appointing people to that committee. And that's what we've worked towards, is to get greater input on who will serve on the FinCom. And I think that when it talks about the third possible town meeting, that is what it is. It's a possible town meeting. So it's not taking away the authority of the Board of Selectmen when it comes to considering a town meeting. We could always have a special town meeting, and a resident could call for that with
Okay.
a certain petition. So
Okay.
we're not taking any responsibility away from people. We're just giving some clarification where there were gaps in the process.
Okay, Harry?
There is no difference between the word authority and power. Pardon me, but there's no difference. You can call it what you want to. I'll call it power. And power is being given. In fact, there are a host of duties of the COPC and the town meeting that were previously described as may. They are all now changed to shall. That's a huge change. One little word, huge change, equals power. I would also like to point out, when we talk about the FinCom, let's remember that this incredibly important, significant committee, number one, has no input from the Select Board, the supposedly co-equal branch, but also it is not beholding to the Appointments Advisory Committee. So all other committees have to go through the Appointments Advisory Committee that's being created, except those created by town meeting and the COPC.
Okay.
It's in there, that's what it says.
Okay. Does anyone else want to speak to this for 1 minute, Steve Bulletin, then we're going on to the next question?
Much less than 1 minute. Just so we're clear, the COPC does have additional authorities. For example, the Open Space Committee. It's appointed by the Planning Board, the Select Board, and the Conservation Committee. Under this new charter, it reports directly to town meeting, i.e. the COPC. So yes, they have now taken an entire committee under their wing that they did not have control over before. That's section
No, that's-
3-14-1.
Okay. All right,
Got it.
we're gonna move on. Clearly, this particular subject of COPC is one that is not agreed upon, as far as what the outcome of this charter will be. So we'll have to probably do a little bit more work on that, so that the voters at home understand what they're voting for. Okay, the next question. Going from 5 to 7 select board members, but 3 will now be district members, and this requires a district implementation committee. How much administrative support will be needed to make this deadline of 90 days, and does this make sense? So I will let one of the charter members answer, and then I'll have Derek Brindisi, our town manager, answer. Harry, our select board member, answer.
I would defer to your original, Derek.
Okay,
Would-
go ahead, Bill.
Okay, well, I just want to speak first to the committee, the Charter Committee's consideration to expand the number of select board members. Now, the reason for this is because Plymouth is now pushing 70,000 people, and we have 18 precincts, and if we want to get voter participation up, we have to give neighborhoods some purpose of going to vote. So when we start to identify parts of Plymouth, we're only suggesting that 3 board members represent north in the middle section of Plymouth and the southern section of Plymouth. And in this capacity, you will have an opportunity to vote a select board member at large to represent the entire town, but you'll also have an opportunity to vote for someone in your neighborhood. This is going to give the residents a feeling of inclusiveness in wanting to participate in that election. Now there's a neighborhood representative along with my town representatives that is serving in this capacity. We feel that bringing someone on board from a different part of Plymouth to serve with the Board of Selectmen, that by osmosis, the selectmen will be engaging one another. We're seeing it bringing the select board together, because now we'll have somebody dedicated to North Plymouth or South Plymouth or the middle section of Plymouth where there are growing issues. And in this capacity, those selectmen will help bring the other select board members on board with the issues that are pending around Plymouth. We see it as an opportunity to give the residents more representation and greater involvement in local elections and turnout.
Okay, and this person did want to know about this 90-day, if this has to be done within 90 days of the
Yes.
charter being
Yeah.
passed?
I think that when we had our census in 2020, there was some results of that material that we had to start to look at forming new precincts. And there was this idea of forming an entity that would make sure and work with the clerk's office that we had the right sections represented and that the voters were not disproportionately represented. So we wanted that process to take place with the clerk's office, with the town officials participating. Just like when we build a precinct, we would build a region.
Okay.
So one region doesn't dominate another.
Got it. Derek Brindisi.
Great, thank you. So I want to make 2 points on this issue here. So Mr. Cohen spoke of neighborhoods and 3 district selectmen representing neighborhoods. Having 104 square miles and dividing that 3 ways is not a neighborhood. Worcester has 11 city councilors. It has 38 square miles and 5 district councilors. Much more representative of a neighborhood feel than what's being proposed. So I just want folks to think of that. The other thing I want to bring up is from an operational standpoint. So I probably spend, in my capacity as town manager, I would say probably 50% of my workday working directly with each one of the select board members. Talk about a number of issues that come up, policy, operational, so on and so forth. Adding an additional 2 certainly takes on more work. And for those reasons, we've talked about looking at the charter and looking at the level of new work that's involved in this. And to Mr. Abbott's question, it was a group of us, Lynn Barrett, Mr. Hartman, Ms. McElrath, and our assistant town manager, that believe that this town charter is going to require at least 8 FTEs. And one of those 8 FTEs is to add a second additional assistant town manager for 2 reasons. 1, because of the workload that's required in here, but 2, going to 7 selectmen. My workday, I believe, will be mostly spent working with the 7 selectmen in that capacity.
So you'll need 7 full-time positions?
8.5 FTEs, so
Oh,
8.
If,
Full-time equivalents, sorry.
okay, full-time equivalents is an
That's right.
FTE. Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that, Harry?
Yeah, thank you, Derek, for pointing out the structural issues. First of all, I'm not sure where Mr. Cohen gets the idea that the Select Board is not able to be united on town problems wherever they occur in our 100 square miles. Love to see a demonstration of proof of that, because it certainly hasn't been during my 2 years. You may not like the decisions, but to claim that the board is incapable of being united on issues wherever they occur in town is incorrect. And let's talk about this whole kind of kumbaya concept that's being proposed here. Let's get down to politics. If I run not as an at-large, instead for one of the districts, the district that I live in, I owe my election to the voters of that district. I owe no loyalty to any other voter in the town of Plymouth, period. That's the way politics work. I owe my loyalty and my work to the people who voted for me. When I ran as at-large, I got votes from across the town. I represent the entire town. These 3 district representatives will represent the districts that they were elected by. That is going to create not kumbaya, but division, in my opinion. And that's kind of, I mean, I don't really have an opinion on issues about expanding the select board, nor the idea of these district representatives, these 3 districts. I don't really have a problem with that, but I think that we need to look at it with our in the light of day, instead of these concepts of happiness and unicorns and rainbows. I mean, we don't live in a world of unicorns, rainbows. We live in a world of reality, and the political reality of 3 district-only representatives is that it will increase division. It has to, because of the nature of elections and politics.
Okay, thank you. Steve, 1 minute.
Very briefly, and I'm not going to offer any opinion about whether or not we should or shouldn't expand. That's fine. Just a practical aspect. Mr. Cohen made the statement that this was going to create representatives from North, Central, and South. That's not the way it works, though. Under state law, we must zone, create districts, precincts, wards, however they're described, by population. That's the standard requirement. Mr. Pizer certainly knows this. He's done it many, many times. So what you will see is you will see a concentration. You will see one district will be concentrated in the north of town. That's where the bulk of population is. You will then have 2 districts created from the remainder of town, large swaths of town by population. There is no practical way to do it, north, central, south.
Okay. Bill?
So I want to make it clear that I didn't say that the board is divisive. I'm saying that having someone from one section of Plymouth serving on the board, not everyone can know every neighborhood, every issue. Their presence, their enthusiasm for that part of Plymouth, whether it's a neighborhood or an area, will be like osmosis, educating other board members that probably didn't know something that was happening on Head of the Bay Road or a Buttermilk Bay or something like that compared to what's going on at Boundary Lane in North Plymouth. So the idea was to bring people on board that would be specifically focused on an area of Plymouth. And yes, Steve is right. We have to sit down and we have to look at the different 18 precincts because there's a certain amount of people in each precinct and we have to equally proportion that to the 3 zones, but focus them on the north, central, in the southern part of the town.
Okay.
That was the intent of that effort.
Okay, thank you. Just before we go on, are there people from the audience that will be having questions that they would like to ask? Raise your hand if you think you're going to have a couple. Just so I can, timing-wise, I can figure out. For the group. No, it'll be questions. These are questions. Yeah. 1, 2 questions? Okay. We're going to go on to another question right now, okay? So COPC is clearly something that is, kind of has a agreement, a disagreement. Number of select board members. I didn't hear a lot of people saying that it was a horrible idea to have more select board members. It's just more the way that it was written, it doesn't jive with some of you. Is that correct? Okay, so more to find out about that. The voters will need more information on that. Okay. Question 6, why isn't there more emphasis on economic development in this charter? That is so crucial to our tax base and future financial structure. Lee, you want to comment on it? Okay. You want, okay. Bill?
What we try to do in the charter is to build into that a process of planning. That planning process that we put in there is to focus on economic development. We want stable, reliable, sustainable economic development. We don't want to see sprawl that drives up the cost of services for the town. Plymouth is growing, and it's growing at a fast rate, and it will continue to grow at a fast rate. Right now we're at the 50% build-out, and so it is imperative that we begin the planning process. We haven't done a healthy planning process for nearly 10 years. We need to go back and do an examination of the whole town, and we need to put into the charter some triggering mechanisms that requires the town to revisit the planning process to keep it up to date as it relates to economic development. Planning is economic development. We need to start looking at that process and modernizing it, making it sustainable, and controlling sprawl and controlling the cost of services. We can only do that by revisiting this subject matter on a timely manner. We felt like that there was no language in the charter that indicated this, and we felt we should put that in the charter.
Okay, point counterpoint? Let's have Lee Hartman.
So I'll just make some review of what they have in here, and I think what Bill is talking about is the language. There's a very large section on master planning that's been added, and again, I think that's a good thing to have and a good thing to add. But When we talk about how that can help, I'm not sure how that helps. And I'll look at a couple of examples. It says that any proposed bylaw, ordinance, or regulation that's done in the planning department. So that's Conservation Commission, Community Development, the Affordable Housing Trust, Zoning Board of Appeals, Historic District Commission, Visitors Services Board, just to name some of them. Any proposed bylaw, ordinance, or rules and regulations that any of those groups look to implement has to be reviewed by me. I make a presentation to the select board, to the planning board, and then the planning board can either agree, disagree, or amend that. And then they send that not to the board that's making the decision, but to the town manager. And there's no process here where it goes back. And I'd also point out that it says ordinance. There are no ordinances in this town. We just have bylaws. It also repeats, because any bylaw, I have to do that process, and then there's a second paragraph that says anything that goes to town meeting has to go through a slightly similar process, but that then goes through with the planning board and then to town meeting. So I have to do it once under the first section that then is reported to the town manager, but not reported to the boards or committees or departments making those decisions, and then a second one that goes for bylaws to to the planning board, and then ultimately the town meeting. And then the third thing it says is that any project, doesn't define what a project is, but any project that's in that department, again, Conservation Commission, Community Development, Affordable Housing Trust, Zoning Bylaw, Historic District, Visitors Services Board, any project. We have projects of septic system upgrades. We have projects with the Conservation Commission for a deck. Any project has to be reviewed by me, then reviewed by the planning board, with a recommendation then that is attached. And again, in this case, it says for approvals, doesn't say anything about planning board denials, but it says only for planning board approvals is that documentation to be included. And there's no reference to how that then links back to any of those other boards or committees. So it's a challenge, and I'm not sure how that helps, except to basically guarantee that we are meeting probably 3 times a week with the planning board to review what I would say is hundreds, if not thousands, of projects that come before my department.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you, go ahead, Derek, you have a minute?
Yeah, just quickly. So I just wanted to make a comment. I had watched a number of the Charter Commission meetings, and one commission member had made a strong point, which I agreed with. That person had said that council forms of government are very heavy on commercial and industrial growth, very pro-development. And when and town meeting form of government is slow and doesn't allow for development to take place as quickly as council form of government. And when those comments were made, having worked for a council form of government for 15 years, in my mind, I said, yes, that's absolutely correct. That's exactly the differences between those two forms of government. So I wonder if, that was part of the rationale, the Charter Commission, to choose the town meeting form of government over the council form of government for those very reasons, so that it's not so heavy on the commercial and industrial growth here in town.
Do you want to speak to that, Bill? Was that ever considered as why you considered town meeting versus another form of government because of building and economic development in one way or another?
No, I mean, any one of these questions is multifaceted. I mean, what's really getting me is the simplistic view of some of what I'm hearing here, like Mr. Helms thinking that because you have a district selectman, he's going to only represent his own district. I mean, my God, across the country, we have forms of government everywhere where somebody represents a district, but he's also a member of a whole. I mean, that's the whole way our national government is structured. Surely a select board member who represents a portion of the town is going to also consider the good of the town. That's essential, and I think any good representative has those two different views in mind, and then the town manager now is suggesting that the town council, I mean, talk about a democratic form of government, and a 9-member town council, they're all going to be representing, there'll be a couple of at large, but many of them will represent individual districts, and if they all sit there on their own turf and don't cooperate with the others, but that isn't the way our government works. That breeds gridlock. No, people are supposed to get along. And even though you're in an adjacent district, you try to work with your partner in another district. But as far as a council, if you're suggesting a council can jam, economic development down faster than a town meeting, yeah, I think that is a problem to me. It absolutely is. And that's why town meeting is a wonderful form of government where representatives have heard and we are heard, that people can be listened to, and it's not a private little group. In my practice, I've gone before many councils in towns that have city councils, and it's a political bucket shop where they're trading back and forth. It's not at all like a town meeting where you have representatives trying to express the will of the people. Right here in Plymouth, we've had examples in the last 3 years where the people have spoken, whether it's the Bump Rock situation or others. It's the representative group that spoke. And if we had a council form of government, yeah, it might have gone the other way, but I wouldn't want to live there. I think one of the key of our charter was quality of life.
Okay, thank you.
That's a key essence of what
Thank
we're
you.
trying to
Thank you,
do
Bill.
here.
One more comment. Go ahead, Steve, 1 minute.
Thank you. I think we're getting off track.
Yep, agreed.
What's at issue here is not which form of government. That's already been decided by the Charter Commission. We have a charter that we have to vote on. So the question is, what does this charter do, one way or the other? What does it provide? What does it advance? What doesn't it do as well? As someone who spoke in front of the Charter Commission on master plan, I was greatly appreciative of their attention to that issue because it's a critical issue. Master plan is important because, as everyone has said, planning is very important. Planning is economics. Planning is our future. But at the same time, we have to make sure that our planning gets effectuated. That's not to say that one form of government or another will or won't do it. But under this charter, the concern that I continue to have is that there is limited opportunities for misinformation to be corrected. And misinformation is the principal reason why good ideas fail. Ideas including things that have been in our master plan for 20 years.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question, and then we'll put it out to the audience. And a few people asked this question, and I don't know if any of you know the answer, is why isn't the school system mentioned anywhere in this charter? Don't we spend almost 50% of our budget on the schools? Bill?
The school system we found that section of the charter was, there was consensus that it was functioning at a level that we were comfortable with. We did not make any dramatic changes to that. There were, throughout the town charter, there were sections that we felt that were working well, and we didn't feel as if it needed a extensive overhaul. And there is, we felt that was, the school has made great advancements in my lifetime in Plymouth, having grown up here and gone through the educational system. We're at a point now in our school system where we have one of the better ranked school systems in the state. So we contributed that to the town, the school side, and the school committee, and didn't feel we needed to alter something that was working well.
Okay. Anyone want to have a counterpoint or answer this person's question? No? Okay. So it wasn't put in because it's running perfectly and we don't need to touch it in this charter?
Well, I didn't say perfectly. It's
Well, I mean,
running well.
yeah,
There was
it's running well enough
consensus,
that you didn't
and-
feel
yeah,
the need to
right.
do anything in this charter. Derek?
Well, I would just say that the school department, the school committee is part of our form of government, and I mean, I think it would have been nice to at least recognize them in the charter.
I think that's what this person was probably saying, is why wasn't it in there at all? Okay. We're going to take a few questions from the audience. If you just come up and say your name and where you live, and then who you'd like to ask the question to, and then we'll have some questions among ourselves to finish it. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Brian Dunn from Precinct 2. I also serve on the Advisory and Finance Committee. I think my question is probably best directed to Kevin Canty from that committee. So I did the math last year and figured out that I spent over 12% of my nights at finance committee meetings, either finance committee meetings or precinct caucuses, et cetera. So my question would be, what impact would this charter have on a workload that's already more than 10% of my nights as this volunteer, for a volunteer committee to do all of this work? What would the impact be?
Thank you, Brian. And, you know, Brian has served on the committee for a number of years with me. Brian is well aware of our current workload, but some members of the public may not be. So at the Finance Committee in town generally, we look at the year in terms of fiscal year. So we start on July 1st, we go through June 30th. We currently, under the current charter, there are two regularly scheduled town meetings. There's one in October and there's one in April. But town meeting for the Advisory and Finance Committee is not a one-day affair. It is a multi-month process of reviews, of generating a book, and attending precinct caucuses. So, for the October town meeting, which meets on the third Saturday of October, we have meetings usually starting in mid to late August that run through mid to late September, depending on where things fall in the particular year. That generates report and recommendation book on all the hearings that we conduct. We're usually meeting weekly for a period of 1 to 2 months, and then the precinct caucus is the meeting itself. The proposed new charter would also create a third town meeting, which I'll come back to. But for now, under the current charter, we then have the April town meeting. The April town meeting involves the review of the town operating budget. So we start, and Brian serves with me currently on the school budget subcommittee. We start hearing the school budget in December. We start hearing the town budget in January. Then we are hearing concurrently for the spring annual and special town meeting for April, and having hearings every week for a number of months in regards to that, for that April 1st town meeting scheduled this year. This third town meeting that would occur sometime in January would require the Advisory and Finance Committee to hear articles in November and or December, probably while we're doing work for the April town meeting or May town meeting because of the way the schedule is, and in my opinion, would make a fundamentally unworkable system. This is already a tremendous amount of work for a group of unpaid volunteers with jobs, with family lives, with hobbies, who occasionally like to see their friends and do things socially, to undertake that are not being paid in any way. So this would take what is currently about a 6-month commitment to essentially at least a 9-month commitment, and that's if there's no special town meetings like there was this past June. So it's a tremendous amount of work under the current system, and under the proposed charter, it's an absolutely unsustainable amount of work for a crew of volunteers.
Thank you. Larry?
I have nothing but admiration for the Advisory and Finance Committee. I have appeared before them when I was town clerk, and they spent a lot of time and a lot of effort listening. One of the things that the charter does is it breaks the distinction between financial and non-financial articles, which would relieve the Advisory and Finance Committee, to be named the Finance Committee, of much of the time-consuming evenings that they spend, because the non-financial articles usually have a lot of proponents and opponents coming before them. So there is relief in sight. It's also the case that the third town meeting is advisory. The select board has the opportunity to say, we don't need it. So the answer is, I think that this charter would actually lower or not raise the responsibility of the Advisory and Finance Committee to be named the Finance Committee.
If I
Derek?
could this is a statement and a question at the same time. So the previous community I worked in was an open town meeting form of government, which just had a finance committee. And the finance committee's responsibilities was to only hear financial articles and financial matters. And oftentimes, there'd be articles that maybe didn't have a dollar figure assigned to it, but there was financial implications. And they'd often debate whether or not they should hear this. So I'm interested to hear from the Charter Commission, how do we as a government decide which articles are going to be heard by the Finance Committee and which articles are going to be heard by COPC?
Larry?
Well, I believe that it was responded to earlier. We left that to the decisions of the committees. If the Finance Committee believed that this was, whatever article we're talking about, was mainly a financial article, they can take it up. It would also be taken up by the Committee of Precinct Chairs if they believed it not to be an article, and the town meeting representatives would have the wisdom of both of those committees.
Okay.
Yes, if I could.
Yep, and then Bill.
So as I said in my opening, there's a line in the charter that the COPC would hear articles that it views as non-financial in nature. But 2-12-2- Section B still requires the FinCom to hear all articles. If they don't, then it would require town meeting to have a 2/3 vote to hear the articles. That's in the current charter. The language is retained in the proposed charter. The current charter requires us to hear all the articles. The same exact language is in the new charter. Second of all, the determination of what is financial and what is not. Almost every article is either directly or indirectly financial in nature because it requires the work of town staff, which is resources and time and projects and things. So even something like a ban on plastic bags, which you could say maybe, oh, well, that sounds more advisory. No, that's got to be enforced by somebody. That has financial implications, as does almost everything in these books. If you were to go back, and I have gone back, in the last several years of how many articles are purely financial in nature, it's maybe 2 or 3 in the last 3 years by my count, if I were to be, that are not financial in nature, that would be purely advisory. And so the amount of work that we are going to have, the Finance Committee is going to go up exponentially, and I don't see any way to avoid that.
Bill Abbott, I had said you could go next.
This was one of the changes that we saw in many other charters in towns that are functioning quite well. Arlington has a provision that, exactly like we were proposing here, that the Finance Committee only hears finance articles. It's not a big problem. You know, I'm disappointed that there seems to be an objection to, which I really consider, rather modest changes. That one is a very easy one. If the two chairs can't get together before a town meeting and decide which committee is going to have the primary responsibility, then they're not trying to make our government work. I mean, we're trying to get the non-financial stuff out of the Finance Committee, and it makes sense. And it does work, and I can give you probably 6 examples of towns that we asked them, how is it working? It's working quite well. One of which, of course, is the town of Arlington, which is a very successful town meeting.
Okay, Harry?
Mr. Canty said he went back over years. I went back to October of 2022. There were 22 articles, 6 were withdrawn. Okay, that leaves 16. I just ran through them. Of the 16, there is only one that I could not see a financial ramification for the town, for the government, or the taxpayers, and that was Article 15, establish a speed limit. All of the other ones would be, up to determination, and as Mr. Abbott said, negotiation, I guess, between the two chairmen. But the issue here is not that this is not a good idea. The issue here was about workload. Okay, that's what we're talking about here.
And that was
to-
his question, was about workload.
That was his question. And in October of 2022, out of 16 warrant articles, only one of them was not financial in nature, and 3 others could be bandied back and forth between the two chairmen. I really don't see that this represents a huge decrease in the amount of work that the Finance Committee, the new Finance Committee, will have to do.
Bill?
So, yes, the workload for the town of Plymouth is increasing and will increase. And this was looking at the success that other towns have had by sharing the responsibility. That was the intent. We're talking about a finance committee focusing all of its attention on raising and appropriating and what that means for a $260 million budget for the residents of the town of Plymouth. We wanted them to focus on that. Not ramifications, not ancillary, but these articles that come before that would be a zoning change. It would get a larger discussion by these by the Committee of Precinct Chairs. So it was about trying to give the Finance Committee the ability to focus its attention on the most important issue at hand, the $260 million budget, and the raising appropriate that goes on in that budget. And that these 2 chairs can get together and talk about what articles will be heard. If there is something that's showing a zoning change that shows an ancillary or ramification that they feel like they want to touch on, they still have that ability to touch on it. We didn't want to deny them that, but we did want to find a way to address the pile of paper in front of Mr. Canty.
Okay. Do you feel you had your question answered?
Good enough.
Okay. And what do you think that answer was?
That it's going to increase.
It's going to increase, okay. Would anyone doubt that it will increase in some way? No, okay. Other questions? Frank?
So I didn't come here, I'm Frank Mann, I'm in Precinct 3, I'm a member of the Charter Commission, I think we're still essentially a group. I'm also a member of the Planning Board. I didn't have any questions, I came here to hear this interaction, and the kind of question that's formed in me, because I've heard such negativity, I've heard such an emphasis on all the bad things that are going to happen to individuals and their departments, and then toward the end of that, I heard a lot of cynicism about town meeting at its root. And I think myself that what I felt we were trying to do on the Charter Commission was empower, to the greatest degree possible, the town meeting form of government. And I believe in that form of government, and I mostly believe in the power of individuals without any vetting, without any bona fides, without any resumes, but just that people that come from the community, and for some reason, the people in their neighborhoods trust them, and they form that, excuse me for being idealistic, that Rockwellian sense of true democracy. And I heard a lot of negatives about that, about we don't trust those people. They can't be trusted. We can't give them authority, responsibility, however you want to name it. We wanted to put them on equal footing. We wanted to enliven that. So I guess my question is, if you don't believe in town meeting members being able to reach that wonderful genius of America, compromise, what form of government do you want? And I would throw that out to anyone in this group.
Can I just respond to that for 1 second? I did not hear anyone downgrading or saying anything about the people that do currently serve on boards and committees. The question that was asked was, should they be vetted in that they'll understand what they're doing? That was the question.
What kind of test would that be?
I don't know that. This was just a question that one of the public.
Well, no,
came in.
I felt it was implied that town meeting is not up to this, that they can't handle the additional responsibility, and I think that baseline is cynical and non-democratic.
Well, that might be how some people feel. So I'm just literally saying what was written into us, and I'm repeating it.
And the question might have implied one thing, but the answers implied another,
Okay.
to
Okay.
my ear.
So we'll let everybody comment on this that wants to, starting, I'll start down the end and go this way. Steve Bulletin? Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Mr. Mann's comments, again, go to the issue of the form of town government, which we can re-debate at some other time. But what we're talking about is a particular document, this particular charter, and the issue as to whether or not the town should adopt this document. And what I believe I'm hearing from the people who have concerns about it is concerns with this document. No one is saying, gee, I don't trust the people who are sitting in town meeting. I know I'm certainly not saying that. But as someone who spent his entire career, and still does, reviewing documents like this, my job has always been to look at this and say, if things don't work out, what are the possible ramifications? What are the downsides? Because again, I'm not saying that I don't trust the people who have been elected to town meeting. What I'm saying is, if things go wrong, if somebody in the future, and this is a document we could live with for decades, if it goes wrong, what could possibly happen? What bad things? Because we're supposed to draft a charter, like a constitution, that addresses these things, that prevents these things from happening. How do you prevent somebody from overreach? Well, you impose restrictions on them. So when people here say, they're not saying, I don't trust the people who sit on the COPC. What they're saying is, there isn't enough oversight in this charter of the COPC, given the authority and responsibility that they are being given as additions. People are not saying, gee, I don't think town meeting knows what it's doing. They're saying, we are getting more and more complicated, more complex. Our budget is $300 million. We're the largest town in all of Massachusetts. We should look for a town meeting form that addresses those concerns rather than continuing to expand that role beyond the ability of people who are volunteers.
Right.
So it's not a negative of town meeting. It's a concern regarding this document, and efforts to spin it otherwise are inappropriate for this forum.
Okay, next person. Derek, did you want to say anything?
Well, I don't have an opinion on the form of government, but I would say this, that as myself as the town manager and the other town officials here on the panel and throughout the community will carry out the will of the people to the best of our abilities.
Thank you. Kevin?
Thank you. So my comments and the comments that I heard from others were about not about saying that town meeting is bad, we can't trust these folks, but we did have commentary about the capacity, and Mr. Bolton just alluded to this, the capacity of some of the existing and newly created boards and committees, or newly empowered, to do some of the work that is going to be asked of them under this proposed document. And I think people need to go into this with eyes wide open. You need to know what your current form of government involves. You need to know that this is increasing the workload from what it is. You need to know that your government is run primarily by volunteers or people who are volunteer adjacent, like members of the select board and the town moderator, who are paid a stipend so low they're essentially volunteering for the town. That the capacity is a reasonable thing to point out to folks. And just writing something down doesn't mean you're going to get a bunch of people willing to carry out the will of the Charter Commission if it's passed. So that's something that needs to be highlighted and people need to go into with eyes open. But I would also point out that it's important people know all the negative baggage that comes along with the proposed charter as well, because your vote in May is about you have to take the good and the bad. So if you vote yes, you need to be aware of some of these negatives and these concerns that we have, because you're signing on for the things you like and maybe some things that you don't like, and you need to know what's in there so you can determine for yourself whether you like them or not. I would suggest that it would be better if the charter were not to pass and a charter review committee were to be formed, where, as it was alluded to earlier by Mr. Hutchinson, this could be used as a learning experience. And some of the things people like in this, that could be done by a charter review committee could actually be undertaken. And that would be something that we could vet on an individual basis, as opposed to the all-or-nothing approach of a proposed charter issued by a charter review commission, which is what we are here. So that's what I would point out.
Thank you. Mr. Hartman, anything that you'd like to say?
So as I'm sitting here listening, I'm thinking, I think I predate Steve. I know I do. So I think I've got Bill Abbott and Larry Pizer on this board are the only two people who predate my experience here. I would say that the town meeting process is a wonderful process. And again, this isn't a debate about whether or not we have it. The decision's made to keep it, at least for now. I think it's a great process, and I've loved working with it. I will say, though, as the years have gone on, it becomes more and more of a challenge to get articles through the process. We're talking sometimes 20 meetings that you have to attend just to get the town meeting. So I see that there's plenty of room for improvement. My concern is that the more we make it inclusive by what some people are calling it, it really makes it hard to get some of the things that we want done. My daughter, when she was 12, who's now 31, once asked me at 12, where are you going today? And I said, I'm going to the Advisory and Finance Committee. Well, what do they do? I said, well, they talk about the articles that the town meeting is going to vote on. And she just looked at me and said, a meeting about a meeting.
Right. Thank you. Harry?
Yeah, when I ran for the select board a couple years ago, the article, the vote was also included on creating the Charter Commission. And I was asked, when I was running, what form of government do you favor? And I said, and I've continued to say for the last couple of years, I favor whatever form of government the voters vote yes on. And I still believe that. But since I am probably included in Mr. Mann's nattering nabobs of negativism about the proposed new charter, I'm going to answer his question. Frank, I am in favor of the town meeting form of government. I don't want it to change. I have a problem with aspects of this. It is not personal. You guys did an immense amount of work. I mean, that, when we're talking about the FinCom or the Select Board or whatever and the work that's done, the Charter Commission did a huge amount of work. But there are things in here that are flawed. Not out of intention to be flawed, but just probably the complexity of what you were what the group was attempting to do. So I'm going to echo what Mr. Canty said and hearken back to Mr. Hutchinson's concept of using this as a model in a charter committee and work on it from there and answer the issues that are in here, because I just find it difficult to support a document that has flaws in it, even though it is a continuation of the form of government that I support.
Thank you. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. As a precinct chair, my problems are, in fact, some of the ones that folks here have addressed. I have to recruit folks for my precinct, and they really don't know how this form of government works, because it's a complicated form of government. It's messy, but it is democracy, and it is. I agree with Frank entirely. It's my ideal. What I am finding is that my precinct members listen and learn, and they'll be pretty good at it. Give them a year, give them 2 years, and they'll be on their way. And I think that if we place an emphasis on educating the public, educating our neighborhoods, doing communications and engagement, that we could improve both this document and the quality of our precinct representatives as we move along. And so that's my commentary on this past several topics, several questions. Basically, I believe that we need to address communications and engagement as one of the big problems that we have in town, and we didn't necessarily do that.
Thank you. We're going right in order. Bill?
Thank you. I started off the evening and I said I believe in a government for the people and by the people. And I believe we all believe this in this room. And we're all working towards improving the form of government. The Charter Commission did focus a great deal of time on town meeting form of government. And one of the things they focused on was giving the people legislative oversight. This is a critical thing, where articles are passed at town meeting, and there isn't any guarantee that that article will go to complete fruition in terms of its execution. So we need to know where the articles are after town meeting. This gives the people legislative oversight, transparency. There's more information on the FinCom level, that when town meeting members are participating on this level, when it comes to building a budget, they're more apt to go to town meeting and debate these issues. A healthier debate at town meeting about our budget would only happen if we have town meeting members participating in that process. There's not a legislative body that I know that doesn't participate in the budget process. On the State House, wherever you go and see a legislative body, they vote on a budget. When you're voting on a $260 million budget, those town meeting members should be engaged in that process. So all we're trying to do is create more information in the hands of town meeting members when they vote on the budget. Greater representation, giving people more identity. The town is growing. Parts of Plymouth, where it was once a forest, are now large neighborhoods in large populations in precincts. We need to give those precincts enfranchisement. We need to give them a reason to vote on election day in local town elections. We heard from our town clerk and how turnout is low. We've heard from others about turnout being low on local elections. This is a way of increasing voter turnout on election day and at the same time giving the biggest town area-wise in the state area representation. The town manager earlier said neighborhood. I guess he has a good point there. It's really areas of Plymouth, because if you took Plymouth and flipped it over like a pancake, it would hit Weymouth. We are huge, and we need to give parts of Plymouth some energy on the Board of Select, on the Board of Select. And then finally, a greater level of community outreach when it comes to this charter. There's built-in mechanisms about planning and economic development, committee appointee. This is about improving a form of government and giving it an opportunity to meet the challenges of the 21st century.
Thank you. Before we go to you, Kelly, I'm just going to go to Lynn Barrett. Do you have final commentary that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that even though I didn't return back to the Charter Commission after they came out with their recommendations, I think that just looking at all the different levels that they have added with committees, and several times where it requires support from the town for those committees, or from the town manager's office, or work for the town clerk's office, that I think it's sort of a no-brainer that there'll be additional costs associated with this proposed charter. I mean, Town of Plymouth already, I would not be doing my fiduciary responsibility as the finance director to inform voters that, we already have budget challenges, and that this charter would probably create some additional ones in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to reiterate what the town manager stated. Whatever the voters vote, I will work very hard to implement what their wish is in any type of form of government. Now, that being said, I'm always an advocate for the voters, so I'm just going to take a 30-second, hopefully, commercial. The voters, you need to vote on this charter, yes or no, on Saturday. The election is Saturday, May 20th, but as most voters know, over the last couple of years, the way to vote has changed. So you can vote by mail. The application is on my website, and you can fill it out, and as soon as the ballots are received, around April 25th, we will mail the ballot to you, and you can vote and send it in. At the same time, because of the importance of this question, the Select Board approved in-person early voting. So this great hall will be set up a week before the election, and any voter can come in and vote the ballot, including select board, planning board, school committee, and this question. And lastly, of course, you have the election day, which is a Saturday, May 20th. The polls will be open at 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at your local precincts that you go and you vote that day. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
Anyone who watched the Charter Commission meetings knows that there were no items on which there was complete assent. People had ideas. People said, I don't like some other ideas, and got outvoted. This was the final product of the commission. The concern that I heard that this might not work. If you look at Plymouth over the past 400 years, it's not the same Plymouth that existed in 1620 or 1720. The town has evolved. I think that the reason that the commission thought that Plymouth should do what Framingham didn't do, that is to say, it should keep town meeting, is because we do have a successful number of people who participate in town meeting. We do have a successful number of people who participate in the advisory committees that the select board and the planning board appoint. I don't always agree with the select board's choice of people, but there are competitive races for various committees and commissions and boards that the town operates. That's the sign of a healthy town. And I think that the issue should be, do you like the charter or don't you like the charter, not will the charter work. It will work if you choose that as the form of government that we should have.
Thank you. And finally, Steve?
Yes, first I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the members of the Charter Review Commission for all their hard work, because I know all of us appreciate all the work and the good ideas that have come out. And thanks to PACTV for hosting this forum. In the interest of transparency and full disclosure, I would tell you that I have received requests from town meeting members, committee precinct chairs, to follow the current charter if this new charter does not pass. And specifically, I'm referring to Chapter 7, Section 6, subsection 1, which provides the responsibility for a special committee to appoint a charter review committee. And if this does not pass in the annual election, as soon as the vote is announced, and if it doesn't pass, I would immediately convene a member of the select board and a member of the committee precinct chairs to work on appointing a charter review committee so that many of the good ideas that are in this charter will not be lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I need to thank all of you so much for participating here. This was supposed to be for the voters. And I'm wondering, being a person that's out there that's never tuned in before, what they thought of this evening. And I'm sure I'm going to get some feedback, and it'll be very interesting. I appreciate how respectful you have all been, even though you agree to disagree on a number of items. There is not one person in this room that is not absolutely dedicated to how they feel, and that they truly believe that their viewpoint is the best viewpoint for the town. I get it. And I applaud you all for your courage and your bravery. Yes?
Can you do a follow-up for the bunch of us here?
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah,
if you could.
we probably
Yeah.
definitely will.
That-
And I will,
thank
again, this was for the voters, and I want to see what the voters have to say. What else do they want to see? For you at home, I hope you understand that, like Joe said, it is messy. Government's messy. Anything's messy. Any big business is messy. But it's the people that make up this town that I think makes it so special. And we will come to a conclusion that works and is the right at this time. It is up to the voters completely whether you want to adopt this charter or maybe another one down the road. I would definitely ask you to educate yourself, inform yourself, ask questions. You probably don't understand a lot of things that were talked about tonight. Frankly, I don't. So it takes a long time. It's over 2 months before voting. You have to vote for this. So I thank you. You can watch replays on PACTV. Thank you for joining us tonight, and good day.